just sort of fill us in on what you know about the situation in San Francisco with this?
Sure. What's going on in San Francisco is that the mayor has decided that news racks are ugly and clutter up the streets. Now, in some cases, he and some of the merchants who are concerned about this have a point. There are people who put news racks in handicap ramps, by bus stops, in places where they shouldn't be. And the city, as far as I'm concerned, ought to be removing those news racks. And there's a law already that allows them to do that. But I think that in the name of beautifying the city, what Willie Brown wants to do is get rid of a lot of these news racks and replace them with what they call ped mounts. Now, ped mounts are what you see at the airport, for example. They're single units that contain space for maybe 8, maybe 10, maybe 12 newspapers, all in one organized unit in one place. The problem with the ped mounts is, if you look in front of City Hall, for example, there's 25, 30, 35 different publications. The city's full of different kinds of publications. Everything from, the LA Times and USA Today trying to sell their papers here, to gay papers, to small real estate papers, to sex papers, to, alternative papers, neighborhood papers. There's so many newspapers in San Francisco, which I think is a wonderful thing. I mean, this shows that this is a really lively, vibrant city with a lot of media. They're not all going to fit in the ped mounts. So a lot of people are going to get left out. I'm less worried about us because, we're one of the 3 or 4 biggies in town. You got the Examiner, you got the Chronicle, you got us, you got the SF Weekly, you got the BAR and Bay Times. There's a few papers that are going to get into the ped mounts. We're going to get our share. The fact is, a lot of the smaller papers are going to get squeezed out. And if they pass a law, which they're talking about doing now, that says you cannot have news racks in certain parts of town. For example, on Market Street, in Union Square, along the waterfront, in many of the major areas where people walk and pick up these papers. If you are only allowed to be in a ped mount, and if there isn't space in the ped mount for all these papers, how are they going to distribute? So as far as I'm concerned, I think it's a First Amendment issue. I'm not an attorney, although I've seen one on TV. I have no problem whatsoever speaking about legal affairs, even though I know nothing about it. I would say this is a First Amendment issue. I would say that this is unconstitutional. I think at some point someone's going to challenge one of these things and say, you cannot limit the right of people to put out news racks on the street and distribute their papers. That's a First Amendment privilege.
No, that's one sort of issue. That's sort of what you mentioned, the ped mount thing. So do you know anything about the
kiosks?
The kiosks. What do you think?
That's the other half of the equation. Now, the problem with the kiosks is they're controlled by the Examiner and Chronicle. This all came in. The deal with Decaux was J.C. Decaux agreed to install these public toilets in the city for free, the 25-cent public toilets, which are not a bad thing. Right? It's a fine thing and something that the city badly needed. But the city, of course, didn't want to pay for it. Right now, San Francisco is always looking for ways to get out of having to pay for anything, because that means, of course, raising taxes on people who can afford to pay them, and the city doesn't want to do that. So instead, we got this group, J.C. Decaux of France, to install the toilets, but in exchange for that, they got to put up free advertising kiosks, which are these big, gigantic behemoths you see on Market Street that are just big, round advertising things. And they got to put up these news rack kiosks that have advertising on the side. The problem is they're controlled by the Examiner and Chronicle, which is why if you go to one of those little kiosks, you can buy 2 newspapers there, the Examiner or the Chronicle. It's like Henry Ford saying you can have any color you want as long as it's black in a car, all right? So we can't get in that. Neither can the LA Times, neither can the Wall Street Journal, neither can the SF Weekly, and certainly the BAR can't get in there. Right? So that's a very limited thing. That's the problem with those kiosks. The question always comes down to who decides who gets into the kiosks, who decides who gets into the ped mounts, who controls the distribution and dissemination of information. If the Examiner and Chronicle are controlling the kiosks, smaller papers like us are in serious trouble. They don't want us there. We're their competition. That's a very, very unfair situation for any small publication to be in. To be forced to go to their competition, to the Examiner and Chronicle, and say, we need your permission to be able to distribute our product.
That's pretty hideous. I had no idea about that, because usually I've seen those newsstands and they never really had a lot of different sort of papers in it. One of the things, if you go to New York, right, a typical New York newsstand,
it's full of everything.
At the seams, and so they're trying to squeeze that into a San Francisco sort of kiosk kind of situation.
And you know what'll happen? What will happen is the number of periodicals that you can sell will decrease dramatically, because there isn't room for them. The New York newsstands are the equivalent of all the news racks in front of City Hall in San Francisco. That's where you go to get there's free publications there. They want the free because it brings people in. There's every magazine and newspaper. New York is like San Francisco. It's full of publications. And you go to those newsstands and you can get them all. What's going to happen when it's just the New York Times, Newsday, the Post, and the Daily News? That's it. That's all that's there. And maybe the Village Voice. No one else is going to be able to get into those kiosks because there isn't room. Now, again, the question's going to come up. Who decides, when you have limited availability of resources to distribute periodicals, who decides which one gets in there? In San Francisco, it's the Examiner and Chronicle for the kiosks. Who's going to own the kiosks? And who's going to decide what publications they sell? If it's purely done on the basis of what makes the most profit, well, you're going to see the Post, you're going to see the Daily News, and you're going to see Newsday. They're the ones that sell the most, and maybe the New York Times. Is there any consideration going on for the First Amendment right of people not only to publish, but to distribute? It doesn't do you any good to publish all the newspapers you want and to have the right of free speech and free press if you can't get your papers out to people.
What do you know about how the impact on the actual sellers themselves? Do you know anything about that, or how they feel about it, or how it impacts?
I would guess that the sellers who are right now in New York, mostly independent merchants, are going to be very unhappy with this because they like the diversity of publications. They're in this, they're small business people. Some of them are bigger business people. They're part of operations that do this. But the fact is they want to offer their customers a wide variety of different products. New York is a very diverse city. Not everybody wants to read the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Post or the Daily News. There's a lot of different people. There are many, many different languages in New York as there are in San Francisco, and there are many ethnic papers that answer them. What's going to happen to all the people who get their daily news in New York from a paper that's published in Arabic? There's quite a few of them. Right? What's going to happen to the people who want to read a French publication? What's going to happen to the people who want to read a Spanish language publication? They may find that they go there to get their Spanish language newspaper because that's their native language, and that's how they find out what's going on in the world, and it ain't there anymore. Go ahead, read the New York Times, even if you don't speak English, because that's what's available in this limited amount of space. That's the problem with this.
Just 1 second, is everything okay?
Yeah, everything's fine.
Okay. Do you want to say something, I'm looking for sort of a general kind of comment about the idea of newspapers on the street is such an ancient kind of thing. When you think of like people hawking papers on the street, and I think some people think of it as like, well, that's like not important anymore because we have things like the internet, we have things like cable, CNN, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have any general views about
this is an old American tradition. The street still is and will continue to be where people interact in a society. In cities, that's why cities exist. Because they're cultural centers where people walk the streets, where people meet on street corners, where people pick up information from the streets. I mean, when you see countries that are in the middle of serious political upheaval, during the rebellions in Poland, one of the most important means of communication for solidarity for the Union was broadsheets that they just went up and pasted on the side of walls, and people would dash out and go and read what this information is. Right? Obviously, the internet, the invention of the fax machine, all these other things are other means of communication, but I don't think it takes away from the street as a central marketplace of information in this country. It's going to be for a very long time because people are not going to sit in little cubicles and just look at computers. They're going to go out to the market. They're going to go out and get a cup of coffee. They're going to go sit in a bar. They're going to walk around and they're going to see things on the street corners. This is where information has always been passed out, and it will be for a long, long time to come. And anything that limits the ability to do that. I mean, you go back to the American Revolution. People stood on street corners and handed out pamphlets. They still do that in New York City and in San Francisco today. They stand on street corners and hand out pamphlets. They put their newspapers in little racks. They put stacks of them in cafes. If you make it impossible for people to distribute information like that, you're really cutting into democracy.